Some Panama from 1984. And so in this second to final chapter, which is chapter 14 of Alex Van Halen's book called Brothers, about his brother Eddie Van Halen, is where we pick up. My name's Elton. This is Elton's 13. Welcome. Okay, so it starts off with a rather prophetic intro from Eddie Van Halen, taken from a 1980s Guitar Player magazine, where Ed says something to the effect that who knows what the future of Van Halen will be. This is 1980 that he's saying this. Maybe someone's head will get egoed out, and alluding to the fact that the band may break up based on what that statement is. A couple of egos got egoed out. Anyways, so the future being foretold right there. Okay, so 1982 is where it picks up in chapter 14, and it blends itself into what is 1984. So it covers within this span about 2 years of information, and sort of done on a cursory level. It's interesting material for sure, and it's the second to last chapter. But it picks up in 1982 with a phone call from Quincy Jones to Eddie Van Halen. Now, Quincy Jones at this point is about, or in the midst of, doing an album with Michael Jackson. And so the song is Beat It, and Quincy asks Eddie Van Halen to please play the solo on it. Now, the idea of performing music outside of Van Halen has been taboo for sure, and this is no different. The band does not want Eddie to go outside of Van Halen and do that. And the band, I mean Alex and David Lee Roth. Well, Ed has a conversation with Al, and Al really tries to hammer it into Ed's head that don't do this. You know, it's not going to help Van Halen. You know, if you want, have Michael Jackson come and sing on our album instead. And so the conversation was left at bad idea and Ed agreeing. Well, Al said that he went away for the weekend, and during that time, Eddie committed and went and played on Michael Jackson's Thriller album, the song Beat It. And the most iconic solo, I mean, it could be argued that's one of Ed's probably most famous guitar solos within a song that he ever recorded. And Al recognizes that fact for sure, or that point of argument. Now, Ed said when he came back and Al found out about it, they argued, and it was a bad argument. Ed saying, well, listen, I only took an hour of my time. I didn't get paid, and it was for somebody that's, you know, who even knows Michael Jackson, you know? Of course, Ed trying to make light of it as possible. Michael Jackson had quite a history before Thriller. He was a solo artist at that time, and I guess after he I don't think they were dissolved, but he wasn't part of the Jackson 5 at this point. And of course, Michael Jackson was known for a couple of decades singing as a young boy in the Jackson 5. So everybody knew who Michael Jackson was, and Ed was just trying to, again, make light of it. And Al says that was a big argument thereafter, and then multiple arguments for years beyond that. And so it was a major sticking point. Al did not understand why he would do that, and Ed, I guess, saw no big deal in it. Well, it did
serve as a sticking point and a fracture for sure. David Lee Roth was not told about Ed's involvement in that song. In fact, David Lee Roth heard the song on the radio many months later and thought that Eddie Van Halen was being ripped off big time. He's like, wow, that guitar solo is pretty much Eddie Van Halen. And it is Eddie Van Halen. And Dave was really upset. Al was really upset. Ed didn't see much of a problem with it, but Al, kind of being in the picture and seeing the larger picture, knew that this was going to create a major fracture, tit for tat, with David Lee Roth. And so, as far as that is concerned, for Beat It, there's a part of the reading I want to get to within the book. It's on page 203, and I think I actually bookmarked it in terms of marking the book. I didn't want to put any marks in the book because Alex signed it, and I've got two of them because my daughter went with me for the signing in New York, so I made this one my sacrificial lamb here. Okay, so Beat It went #1 all over the world. Ed's cameo in Thriller became one of the most famous solos in rock, and it wasn't on a Van Halen record. It wasn't just a solo either. Ed actually rearranged the whole track. And this is Ed quoting, I think in parentheses, I listened to the song and I immediately go, can I change some parts? I turn to the engineer and I go, okay, from the breakdown, chop this part, go to this piece, pre-chorus, to chorus, and out. Took him maybe 10 minutes to put together, and I proceeded to improvise 2 solos over it. Yeah, so that was the skinny there as far as Ed's involvement there in using some of his words. And so, again, Dave wasn't warned. He was really upset. He felt very much betrayed. And Al said that he felt betrayed too. And he said he will always back up his brother, but that betrayal was pretty thick. And so on page 204, yes, back-to-back readings here. Let me scoot over to 204 and go to the area that I bookmarked for 204, penciled in another area. Look, Ed's my brother. I'm always going to take his side. But this gave Dave a leg to stand on when he wanted to do things without the rest of the band. And boy, was he right. It amped up the game for tit for tat between my brother and Dave. It's not like it started with the Michael Jackson thing. It was ongoing and intensifying. Dave was mad at Al for upstaging him in the press with Valerie. Ed was mad at Dave for blowing off his wedding party. Dave was mad at Ed for being a musical prodigy, for getting attention as an individual, a virtuoso, separate from Van Halen. Ed was mad at Dave for putting up a fight about almost every instrumental track on our records, and on about matters large and small, creative, technical, sonic, visual, intellectual, and moronic. I like how that statement was capped off with the term moronic. Well, it's happening. The seeds had been set in the past, and now the fissures are starting to kind of widen here at this juncture. Now, it didn't stop Ed from going out and doing another side project. Dweezil Zappa, the son of Frank Zappa, was in junior high at the time, was learning how to play guitar, and Ed had gone over Frank's house because where Ed had moved with Valerie, Frank didn't live very far away. And so I think Frank had made a comment in the press that he thanked Eddie Van Halen for reinventing the electric guitar. And Ed had gone over and I guess was showing him some music. And next thing you know, Frank's asking him, hey, do you mind producing my son's single here? And so Don Landy and Ed go over and they lend their talents to helping Dweezil Zappa. And this, Al just couldn't understand it. Listen, the Michael Jackson thing's bad. Look what you're doing now. But at least they had the decency, as Al says, to go under an assumed name. They were called the Vards, or they were credited as the Vards, V-A-R-D-S, which is a takeoff of Eddie Van Halen's mom. When she would say Edward, it was Edvard. And so that's where the credit kind of came in. Well, being at Frank Zappa's house and in the studio, Ed started realizing, wow, home studio, pretty cool. I don't particularly like being under the microscope every time I go into the Sunset Sounds or the studios provided by the record company. It sounds like a good idea. So 5150, its inception, his home studio, is starting to kind of take root in Ed's mind. Anyways, they look into getting a studio, and that the zoning laws where Ed lived would not allow for it. Well, at the time, racquetball was huge, kind of like, I guess, the equivalent of pickleball right now, right? And so they had the idea of, we'll put in a racquetball, you like the air quotes, I feel weird doing that. Anyways, there I go, a racquetball court on his property. It just so happens that they over-construct the racquetball structure with like 2-foot walls, cement walls and stuff. And as it was being put together, the construction company go, whoa, this is like fortified, like big time. And they're like, well, you know, we don't want to disturb the neighbors. We like to play late at night. And so they made a racquetball court. And I think they actually played racquetball on there a couple times. And then they quickly went into like shift mode, make a studio out of it. And so Al points out that Ed put together a building for racquetball and was going to have to retrofit it into being a recording studio. And he said, well, Ed was no stranger to that. I mean, he retrofitted guitars, cars, same thing. We'll just do it with the studio. So they had a $50,000 budget, and it's back in 1982, to try to get all the equipment in to have a studio that was worth its salt in terms of production. And so Don Landy actually gives 5150 its name. At the time, he had a police scanner. And so he would listen to the police scanner and started learning all the police codes. And 5150 is the involuntary commitment of someone who is kind of criminally insane, I think. And so it made perfect sense. What a great name for the studio. So they got a 1961 console, the appropriate microphones, compressors, all the stuff that go into a studio. And they also had a piranha that Edward had caught in Argentina. And where the control room was, there's a window, a double pane window. And between the double panes, Ed put the piranha, put a cigarette in its mouth. And I guess it's still there, possibly now in 2024. You'd have to ask Wolfgang, who's assumed, I guess, all artistic things with 5150 now. But the piranha got stuck between the two panes of glass, which I thought was a funny aside there, with a cigarette in its mouth. But anyways, so 5150 is born. They felt, in this Al speaking, that they were free to do anything now, that nothing was off limits. Something as silly as bringing Eddie Van Halen's Lamborghini close enough to the studio and putting mics near the mufflers and hearing the car actually get revved, which you will hear if you go back and listen to Panama, that middle section of like, I reach down between my legs, all that stuff, that breakdown part, you'll hear, and that's Ed's Lamborghini. And the direct result of them being able to do stuff at 5150 Studio, which I thought was pretty cool. As far as the actual making of the album, Ted Templeman did not like that 5150 is being constructed, being used. He was losing power over Van Halen and their recordings. Dave didn't like it either. It was Ed's place. Ed was there for all the recordings, the mixing, and so he was losing sort of an element of power there. And I can understand that, you kind of feel bad for Dave in that, but Ed did not want any more restraints. And so Ted comments on this on page 209, and so I will find 209 again, and we'll go right to the quote because I penciled it in. Hooray for me. It only took until the last 2 chapters of the book for me to figure that out. All right. This is Ted's words. It looked like a half-finished construction project on the inside. There were exposed 2x4s, wires running everywhere. The patch bays weren't color coded yet, so only Don could decipher the inputs and outputs. Ted didn't like the idea that he had less control over the process, and he was bummed out that it was smaller than the studios he was used to recording in. Whenever I was in there, it felt like I was working in a bathtub. Everything was so confined. You know, Ted Templeman is used to the best studios, real lavish stuff, and here they are in a bare bones, do-it-yourself situation, and he wasn't liking it at all. Now, I guess Al had spoken with Don Landy. Now, Ted's still alive. He wrote a book. In fact, if you look in the description down below, you'll see it's one of the books that I listed as far as essential Van Halen reads for sure, if you really want to get the inside scoop on the band. Don Landy, I wish he would write a book, because this guy spent the most time with Eddie Van Halen from their first album all the way up to OU812, particularly during 1984. I mean, the guy was basically sleeping in 5150 studios with Eddie, pulling all-nighters. Valerie Bertinelli being very concerned that they wouldn't come out literally on days on end, and that's actually mentioned in the book. But Don had conversations with Al before Al put the book together, and he said that he told Al, listen, if 5150 wasn't born, this Jump would have never, ever seen the light of day. It was that freedom that they had to be able to experiment with keyboards and all the rest of that stuff, that song was birthed and came to fruition. And like I said, it's their biggest single to date. Forever, unless some sort of form of new music comes out from Van Halen from the vaults. But right now, it's going to be Jump for the most part. Both Ted and Dave did not like the fact that Eddie Van Halen was playing keyboards. Again, the idea of him being a guitar hero, stay away from the keyboards. And Al puts in a very interesting aside here. You know, he said that Ed ran away from piano to go to guitar as almost a rebellion against his mother, and now is picking up keyboards instead of guitar as a rebellion against the producer. I thought that was a very interesting set of insights for that in this time frame. Okay, so Al states that 1984 came the closest to the sound that they were hearing in their head. In fact, it remains the record that he's most proud of, and he also mentioned that was true of Eddie Van Halen too. That was the one. 1984 was originally supposed to, one of the running titles for the album before it became 1984 was Animal Farm was the original title. Thank goodness they changed that to 1984. It just sounds cooler. Anyways, Ted eventually comes to realize that Jump is going to be this juggernaut tune for sure, but it took a while. Now it was a real task to bring David Lee Roth on board. Listen, this song's really, really good. It's going to do some phenomenal stuff. And Dave he just wasn't having it. And so let's take a look on page 212, where it's time to convince Dave, hey, let's really work on this song. It was a massive pain in the ass getting Dave on board. It was like pulling teeth to get him to sing the damn song. That's Ed quoting right there. But I have to hand it to Dave. This is now Al speaking. When he finally stopped moaning and actually wrote the lyrics, he did a stellar job. And so initially Ted was concerned Dave was writing a song about suicide, Jump. You want to die, jump. But according to Ted, Dave explained to him, no, that's not what I mean. I mean, you've got to find your nerve, take a chance. Okay, there's a nice young lady across the room, take a chance, go over and talk to her. She might say no, but jump, go for it. And that was the original idea. It had nothing to do with jumping from things because of hard life stuff. Anyways, so when Roth finally did write the lyrics, Al gives him really great props here. He says, I get up, nothing gets me down. You got it tough. I've seen the toughs around. Baby, I know how you feel. You got to roll with the punches to get to what's real. Soon we'll be hearing tens of thousands of fans screaming those words back at us. So Al giving big props to Dave. I like it when he gives Dave props. It's great because all we've heard, at least for me, growing up, is just that acrimony of the back and forth and the mudslinging. And, Dave has his quirks, but they all do. But it's pretty cool that Al will give him the positive light here, because I'm not used to hearing Alex Van Halen giving David Lee Roth props ever. Throughout my listening of Van Halen since I was young, it was always Dave was the enemy, and very little positive stuff being said about him. So it's cool to see some great stuff in the positive light about David Lee Roth from Al here. So they tried to, at the video age, so they got a video going, and they tried to get the guy that did the Pretty Woman video, the one that got banned. And David Lee Roth had this big grandiose thing. He wanted a bunch of B-roll being shot, like him driving in his 49 Mercury, cruising down the stuff, and like a whole bunch of sequences that would be interceded in the video. Well, they got rid of all that stuff. You can actually find that footage on YouTube. You'll find it all there, quite a bit of it. Them playing cards on a boat, Dave driving down, that whole scene in the Panama video. They used some of it, it seems, in the Panama video. Dave riding his motorcycle and all that good stuff. It was supposed to be for Jump, but it got canned for Jump. So Jump became a very stripped down video, the one that we know and love. That's one of the first videos I remember seeing from Van Halen. In fact, I think it was the first video I ever seen from Van Halen. Thought it was really, really cool. Real stripped down. So 1984 took a year to make. Don and Ed had made a pledge to each other that they weren't going to puke this one out. In this, that's in quotations there, and that's direct quote from the book, puke this one out. They wanted every song to be the best that it could be. Anyways, as far as Dave, his growing discontentment, yes, it's growing here, but the fracture hasn't happened yet. There's one more chapter. That's going to be chapter 15, the last chapter of the book. But it ends for chapter 14. The result was 1984 has sold over 10 million copies to date. Jump was nominated at the time for 3 Grammys. Ted Templeman finally came around to the fact that, yes, it is a phenomenal album. He likened it to their Sgt. Pepper's, the Beatles' great album. What it was to their career, Jump is to Van Halen's career. And it reached number 2 on the billboards. And it ends kind of with a little bit of a twist. Second to Thriller, the Michael Jackson album that Eddie Van Halen played the solo to beat it. So, weird way to end it, but that's how it ends. All right. Thank you very much for joining me. My name's Elton. This is Elton's 15. Thank you for tuning in, and thanks again.